Good morning. I'm going to use the mic today. I hope you had a nice evening and enjoyed breakfast. I know it's a little rushed, but lunch is at noon. It's not that far off. I think we'll be okay. I want to make sure that we, give the time for each of the topics. And I also want to thank Claudia for leading the hike and the stretching this morning. It was really nice. We went up to the Zen deck, and for those that wake up in the morning, maybe we can do it again. It's really beautiful outside in the mornings here. And let's see. I think I can give other updates later. Let's get into the talks for this morning. And I want to introduce AJ Leeds. He's from UC Davis, the Global Affairs Office, and he's their Global Risk Manager. Actually, let me say your title already. Travel Security Manager. And Eric from UC San Diego is the UAS Program Manager, which also is Drone Program Manager, and he says it crosses over with field safety quite a bit as well. So we sort of teamed them up to give different perspectives on risk assessment. And so they'll be sharing some information, and then we'll be doing some exercises and going through some scenarios and others today. So let's see, which one of you wants to get started?
Yes.
You want this or do you want it?
That should be okay. Everybody can hear me right? So my name is AJ Leeds. I'm from UC Davis. My background coming different than a lot of people in this room coming out of academia. My background is in international security, so I focused on data collection, analysis, counterterrorism, those types of applications. What we've done at UC Davis is take those applications into risk assessments based on country, location, and travel. So what we do, what the service I provide at UC Davis is I'm responsible for the safety and security of all UC Davis travelers who go international. So we're looking at that individual traveler, breaking down its risk, and then we're breaking down the risk in a particular location. So that's geopolitical risk, terrorism, crime, medical, and then all the things that come into the field safety plans that you guys put together before you go.
As Sarah mentioned, my name is Eric Delucien. I work at UC San Diego, and I work with the drones. And I fly drones for our department in environmental health and safety. And I help all of the campus fly safe, legally insured, following privacy and policy. I work with Brandon Stark quite a bit. He's the director of the system. I work with the field safety team for our department as well. I'm a first responder on campus after hours. What else do I do? I've worked about 15 plus years in health and safety. And occasionally I do get to go on a very cool field trip to a country. I'm going to Jamaica in a week. And this is Popocatépetl of Mexico City. And that was at level 2. The volcano was starting to get very active. And we were in the middle of nowhere. And that was actually a really fun but scary trip. And looking back, maybe we should have been there. But yeah, like AJ said, we're going to give you a bunch of different scenarios and go over them. And whatever range you're at, if you've been doing this for a long time, hopefully this will refresh your vision and your perspective on the hazards, because it's sometimes it's kind of like being a pilot. If you've ever flown a plane, you get a little bit lazy and you get a little bit too comfortable. And if you haven't been taking a lot of trips or you're fairly new to doing research trips, hopefully this will really kind of excite you and get you stimulated, or at the very least, as I said in the next one, heavy dose of paranoia and anxiety. That's probably one of the objectives. You can add to the objective.
The idea is to make you guys think outside the box on what risks are when you're traveling, especially in the international environment. So thinking beyond just the direct area that you're in, but the impacts that can be caused by other events in the region or in the country.
And some of you have already been kind of spying on and asking some questions of what's something that really scary happened in the field. And so that's actually going to be our first tabletop exercise with the people you're sitting next to today. Because what we want you to do is try to go around everybody, at least do a quick roundabout where everyone can participate. If you don't have one, that's okay. You could just skip and listen to others. But please share the time fairly. We're going to do about 10 minutes, I think we said here, or 15 minutes. Let everyone go around and share your scariest, unforeseeable incident in the field. and a lesson learned. So we'll take about 10 to 15 minutes. Does that sound good? And yeah, discuss amongst yourselves. Let's wrap up the conversations. I'm so sorry for the whistle. I know you all wanted to do it yourself. This could be to the entire workshop, switching and going around, and we would learn so much. Unfortunately, we want to move forward, and we hope that you continue these conversations. Last food for thought, think about what your blind spot might be, whether you're a seasoned veteran or you're new. What do you think your blind spot is when you do travel? And then we'll just kind of move forward on the next one. We all kind of have blind spots when we go on these trips.
So we have here's the risk matrix that we're going to be using during the different scenarios that we're going to be discussing. So obviously what we're looking at is the likelihood of an incident and the consequences of an incident occurring. Obviously, when making go, no-go decisions, you're looking for things you can easily accept the risk of or easily mitigate against. So low probability, low impactful events, and obviously looking at high likelihood, high impactful events. And those are areas that are easy to avoid. Where we run into different types of situations is the low likelihood, the high likelihood, low consequence events. These are things that can be mitigated, but are gonna be the most common things that you're gonna run into in the field. Stomach flus, things like that. The things that can be easily mitigated, easily dealt with when you're in the field, but have a high likelihood of occurring. What I find is that most people have the most difficulty with is low likelihood, high impact events. These are events that are unlikely to happen when you're in the field, but are hard to respond to. These are incidents like sudden unknown medical condition. So we heard from someone in our group, a 20-year-old having a cardiac arrest incident. This is something you're not planning for, you're not expecting to happen. You're in a remote location, so now you're trying to figure out how to medically evacuate this person before it becomes very serious and highly impactful incident. So when we move through our scenarios, those are the things that I really want. We're going to be able to really easily identify these three groups, but really taking that extra time to look at these low likelihood, high impactful events and how you can mitigate around those. We saw in the beginning of the COVID crisis, a lot of these type of events, sudden restrictions on travel, sudden, border restrictions, certain flight restrictions. I mean, if you were not a US citizen and you were stuck in South Africa a couple months ago, you weren't going anywhere for a couple weeks. And we saw that with different travelers being stuck in location for a period of time where these different restrictions were sorted out. Those are things that are really hard to plan for before you go, but can have a really high impact on your guys' travel.
And this is taken from the Field Operations Safety Manual that you can find at the UCLA Field Safety site. And it's also adapted loosely. Sarah, thank you for printing these out on the GAR model, the US Coast Guard. So this is kind of the light, easy version of it. If you want to go deeper into it, this paper is available here on your tip. Ready? Yep. All right, so we're just giving you this to look at because we're going to go through different quick scenarios based on that. So you can better understand the matrix and kind of see how it plays out.
I'm trying to put this into the easiest terms. So returning research trip to Ukraine to continue study of vulnerability of Ukraine's forests due to climate change. Obviously.
So this is you, you're going out. This is what your mission is.
So this is your mission. This is maybe something you've been planning for the last 3 months. Conditions obviously in Ukraine have completely changed. So now you're looking at high probability, high impact events, since there's an active war zone right now, which automatically puts you in the stop column for this trip. But as we start to expand out from the most obvious, What about Poland? So now you're looking at operating in Poland. You no longer have this direct threat of, bombs dropping in your local neighborhood. But what you do have is you have protests. You have refugees streaming across the Polish border. You have all sorts of impact events that could come from possibly Russian hacking. Russians could shut down banking systems in Poland. They could disrupt travel. They could disrupt flights. All these are possibilities. Then you have to look at the step down. Poland could put restrictions on withdrawing money, so you could have cash flow issues while you're there. Housing and lodging issues. As more and more people enter the country from Ukraine, there's going to be lodging issues to think about. So there's going to be all of these additional impacts onto your research trip into this region that are caused by the initial impact, which is the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Move further away. Now you're looking at Germany. Germany being involved in sanctions on Russia. Russia's already threatening to use their cyber divisions to attack NATO infrastructure. So we're talking utility outages. We're talking cutting off of fuel supplies. So even things as simple as how are you going to receive heating in some of your locations might be an issue. Transportation will be a possible issue. Again, they could target things like banks. So credit cards might not work. The ability to pull out money at ATMs might not be available to you. So you're going to have these different impacts that might be things that you need to think about when you're in these areas, still all from the initial international event, which was the conflict in Ukraine. Further away, now you're in Switzerland. Now you're starting to look even more into this low likelihood, low impactful events. Switzerland's a neutral country. Russia operates a lot of its own banking out of Switzerland, so the likelihood of them targeting the Swiss with denial attacks against banking or banking disruptions is low. So we're starting to lower that risk and that carry-on impact from the Ukraine. So this is just kind of that general idea that just because an international incident is happening far away from your location, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be impacts from that specific event.
Okay, are you ready to now be given a scenario and work in a team and use the matrix and figure out all of the different hazards? Because that's what we're going to do. We couldn't figure an easier way to do this. Do you want to just keep out the table?
Yeah, I think if you have a table, if people that are at like a table, most tables have 5. If a couple of people at tables of 6 will come up to table 4 here, there are only 2 people from table 6 to come up to 4, and then we should have about an even number. And maybe I think there's 3 tables of 6. If 2 could come to table 4 and 1 could come to table 3, that'll about even us all out.
We were going to mix you up and so you don't get too comfortable with one another, but that'll take some time and since we're running low on time. Assign risk color. I think we should have gone over this first.
They'll figure it out. And things they haven't thought of.
Okay, 1 second before you begin going into it, we just want to go over what the matrix is going to look like here, how it's going to proceed. We're going to have you write onto these whiteboards, because then what we could do is paper is we can do a carousel afterwards, and everyone can kind of see what everyone's come up with. And here's sort of an example. Let's say we go back with the Poland trip. The hazards, what you want to do is you want to list out the hazards, as many as you can. Try to get that paper filled with all the different possibilities of what could go wrong. And then the risk category color is similar to the matrix that we showed. Low, green, amber, gold, caution, high risk, red. And then come up with possible controls, risk mitigation actions on your paper. Any questions?
You want to do this on the big.
Yeah, do it on the big paper.
All right, we are going to do a quick close on this activity. And want to first of all thank you all for your time. Thank you for your valued input. Thank you for your discussions. It's great all those scenarios put out.
Yeah, so I just wanted to start off by going around to each of the table and just giving us what was the most difficult thing or the problem you ran into when you were trying to come up with the different hazards. So what was something that you guys had a difficulty trying to sort out? So if somebody wants to start.
All right, we were doing research in Mongolia and none of us felt prepared for Mongolia. Like no clue, so we would need help from like local poor guys, I don't know, people who been to their country and nobody knew really what to even anticipate.
So I think there's a lot of those cases for you. You get into a situation where you want to do some sort of research to a certain location, but it's somewhere you haven't been before. So how do you start off finding out what you don't know? Is really what it comes down to. Is what do I not know about traveling into this situation? Anybody else?
Other than knowledge of the location, I'd add knowledge about the field. Personally, I don't know anything about geology or anything, so maybe I don't know what are the hazards related to it. Luckily, our group has biologists and geologists, so we were able to identify some of those risks. So I'd add maybe knowledge about the field or like the research, because it is important to have a team of like professionals that are from different disciplines to kind of assess the.
So being able to bring in people with certain knowledge based on certain expertise for certain things. So, you know, it's something that we talk about with those field safety plans, you know, is who's an expert in this? Who do I need to talk to get prepared?
Okay, for our group, we did have an expert in both fields, so it was great. But we still vacillated between amber and red for stuff because it might be common, but the effect could be really detrimental. For example, going into a cave and being exposed to hydrogen gas. It's deadly, but it's also commonly found in confined spaces. So how do we categorize that? That was something that we went back and forth with.
Was there a resolution to that? Did you guys come up with like a mitigation plan that you were able to push down the rating, or is it?
In underground spaces, I don't go into it as a geologist, so
Yeah.
it's easy to shift it towards red.
Yeah.
That's always, I mean, caution is definitely not always, you know, a bad choice. Group one, what did you guys have?
Well, I think like for us with the situation we were going to Baja and you know, probably applies to a lot of international travel, is like the importance of having a local collaborator in that region, so that you do have a sense of what the logistical situations are like down there, or just what the cultural thing is.
Great. So again, tapping into that local knowledge base to help you with these assessments before you go. Group two.
I think the biggest issue in our project was in Texas, so not underestimating that, even though it's in the United States, take for granted that things that you do take for granted can be taken away in a heartbeat during a natural disaster.
Great. We heard from group three.
Our scenario is doing plant surveys in Central California. And so I would say that my sense was that we were feeling pretty good about this. We were doing a good job until we found a dead body. And that sort of just like opened up a whole like, oh my gosh, what are all the other things that we haven't thought about?
Was it one of your own people?
No, because we're working alone.
So even worse, you're working alone and you run across a dead body.
Yeah. So that, I don't know. For me, that really brought home the Don Rumsfeld's unknown. Right? You know, it's like, so you spend a lot of time thinking about all the things that you know about and trying to plan for all those, but then what are all of the things that could potentially happen and that could be really significant? And you know, how do you envision those? How do you plan for those? And
I think how far down the line of this is never going to happen in a million years, but if it does, it's catastrophic. So spurred on by the Ukraine scenario, is like, well, what about Red Dawn? What if Russia invades Central California next week? What do we do? Right?
Go Wolverine.
How much time do we need to plan for Red Dawn versus Snake?
And I think that's the other thing that we have to think about is balancing too far down the rabbit hole and risk to the point where it's kind of can become paralyzing to moving forward on a project, but also taking into account as many of the risks as possible when you're moving forward. Group 5.
Yeah, I can start a little bit if you guys want. Our scenario was, visiting agricultural sites and taking, soil and local agricultural samples, but also interacting with the local agriculturalists as well. And so I think we spent a lot of time thinking about those two aspects, sample taking and speaking to people, and so there's a big focus on kind of field safety in terms of pathogens, pesticides, and so on. And then also just really thinking carefully about the local politics, the potential for confrontation and distrust from the locals to this group, our group coming in from nowhere. And we also were doing pretty good until Brandon got shot. And so that was kind of our surprise scenario, which is to how do we deal with that on the ground so there's an immediacy to be able to understand how to deal with some kind of wound that comes through like that. And that kind of bifurcates into two different situations. Is he getting shot through a direct confrontation? Maybe there's a hunter, maybe there's a sniper, so there's different responses to different kinds of gunshot wounds. And so really understanding how to be prepared for all that and having the communication tools if needed. So these are things like sat phones or in-reach units or your cell phone, which probably won't work if you're in a rural situation like that. So there's a lot to think about. I don't know if you guys wanted to add anything else to that.
The other component of our scenario was the human health aspect of it, where not just collecting agricultural samples, we also collect human health samples from locals, and that's kind of where sort of the issue of local confrontation / distrust of foreigners entering kind of the community comes in, and we kind of agreed that having a local ambassador working with us to sort of garner the trust of the locals would help a lot in this scenario.
Great. Group 6.
Go ahead, guys.
So what was the most difficult part when you were coming up with the hazard scenarios?
It's the unknown unknowns, and also like assigning risk categories when you know nothing like about the on the ground situation. You're just like, well, this might be a risk, but we don't know. We need more information. Yeah.
We've heard from 7, 8.
We were in a forest, nondescript, unidentified location, preparing to a forest, preparing for a field course. So a group of students presumably come. We did not disclose the amount of time. We didn't know if they were arriving in 6 hours or 2 weeks from now. We were very concerned about bees, the chainsaw that was on site, how we would communicate during a medical emergency, kind of preparation that our participants would have that would allow them to be active or inactive participants in the program. And then we were concerned about the serial killer, the dead body, for the potential for the serial killer.
Bees still the highest concern.
Oh, and then when the rumor of the serial killer breaks out, then we were concerned about parents of the students somehow getting involved as well, and then important time that staff needs to support the participants away from the participants to deal with the serves as an external party. Parents who are listening.
So you bring up a really interesting point that our campus is struggling with. I'm kind of curious to this group. Like one of the most common things we worry about is like your shop is one of the more common things what we found in the more sensitive. And so we've had trouble getting applicants because they need to be able to describe. And I'm just kind of curious how other campuses feel about it or think about that risk.
We did.
I can see that.
With wilderness first responders can get epi carried. But I'll talk to you guys tomorrow about whether or not that works.
Yeah, we had brought up a course and the guy had said that, I don't know, there was something where we talked to UCI and they were saying like, you couldn't find a doctor or something. So
Yeah.
If
you don't mind, I'll interject. You're from Irvine, right? So I think part of it, there has to be a physician on campus that'll be the medical director and actually prescribe. But there's a number of campuses here that have an FD auto injector program because, like Curtis said, you can get the training if you have worker, even wilderness first aid, some of them will happen to be FD auto injectors. And Nellie and Claudia and Heather and I can all teach the training as well. So we do trainings for different groups. And so basically, in California, trained as a lay rescuer, and then you're administered the FDA auto injector to take with you, but it's not prescribed for you as a trip leader. So it's sort of a tedious, those that have gone through it, it's a tedious process, but there's a way to do it. The key thing is you need to have a physician on campus who's willing to prescribe and support the program. So we can talk a little bit more. I don't know the resources that much at UCI, but at Davis, at Berkeley, at UCLA, I found that people do that.
Yeah, I mean, like UCSD, you have occupational health.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. So there's definitely a legal route to do it, which is unique to California. It's not actually, that's not ubiquitous everywhere. It's relatively new, maybe 5 years or so. But you do have to have training, and then you can't just give the EpiPen and provide it to everyone, but you have to show it's still, and then they expire, unfortunately, like you need to have the material expenses, but here's a
yeah, I think you're instructing on that.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea if you have your class, you know someone has allergies, they need to bring them up.
Yeah.
And obviously we find that they can't show the list they have, like, probably two.
Yeah, usually.
It looks like someone can do it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, and so that's kind of a different, if someone has known allergies and they bring their own, then absolutely, I mean, you can assist them in getting them their own, because they've been prescribed for their allergies. But the training program that we're talking about is a little bit different. It's like, if you're bringing a group and you don't know if people have allergies and they have a reaction to it, it's time they have it on site. It's a little bit different.
Kind of throwing in on this, like when you're coming up with your hazard plans, you want to bring it all the way down to that individual person level. So you want to, not everybody's thinking about their own medical stuff or thinking about that type of stuff, but bringing it down to that level when you're talking to the different participants in your group and saying, what medical things do you need to consider? So in certain remote locations, medication availability might be a problem, getting that set up in advance, making sure they're bringing EpiPens, making sure they're bringing their medication, making sure that you have a way to possibly get access, even if it's remotely, to a medical provider to assist. Starting to think about those things down to that individual level. So not just necessarily a medical emergency, which you have to plan for as well, and medical evacuation, but then the individual people, making sure that you're making sure that they're thinking about this as that individual level. What do I need to bring to make sure that I am safe in this situation beyond the steps we're taking as a group to mitigate risk? So it's just thinking about that as well.
My experience with Boy Scouts is that that's what we do. Our trips is we go around and make sure that we know what's happening with each kid that's going on the trip, so that we can plan for any eventualities that happen.
We'll finish up with group 9 and then. Those guys.
So we were asked to do drone flights over up to our full site in Iraq. So our first couple of initial things were things that we were, normal things that you would take into account, like heat and food packages and theft and so forth. And for those, we thought we could rely on a local expert to help, like maybe a chef or something
showing you all this fine local medical places. And then we're thinking about cultural differences were very important. Again, a local expert would be good for that. And then the thinking about drones and using drones in Iraq could be very problematic. Talk to the community about what we're doing, because that could be a terrifying possibility to have a drone near them. So having activities with the community might help, being able to show them what we're doing. And then the planning ahead of time, I just learned about these risk assessment tools it's called Crisis 24 for UC, and then there's an international one called International SOS. You can pay a lot of money to have them do the risk assessment to tell you ahead of time. Again, those resources won't be available when you're actually on the ground. As we talked about it more, it seemed like a local expert was very important, and maybe we could just hire a local expert to do the whole thing.
But if you show up and the local expert's not there or doesn't come through with what they promised, as we discussed the other day with Uganda, what do you do? So always an X factor. Just to close it up, what we wanted to do is, if anybody is going on a trip in the near future, and if anybody sees after they put their name, I'm going to put my name here, Eric, I'm going to Jamaica, Kingston. So if anybody's been over there and they want to link up with me, put your name there, find me. If anybody's going somewhere in the near future, please put your name there. And if you want to look afterwards and maybe kind of reach out to that person in the next day and a half, that'd be great, because then we can have more of these conversations, continued kind of mentorship, and I think that's really welcome these workshops and so forth. So on that note, we'll end it.
Can we flip that too, where maybe we know we're an expert in a place?
Yes.
And so then.
Yeah, if you have an area of expertise and you want to throw it down, I mean, so I can just.
It's a great idea. Yeah, if you have a.
In the same vein, I can just put this down, my name, and then just general security questions. You guys have any kind of security questions when you're traveling abroad, I can help answer a lot of those sorts of questions.
If you want to further these questions, conversations, anything with drones, Dr. Brandon Stark here, he's my mentor, and I'm learning from him a lot as well. But you can reach out to me. I have a wealth of knowledge, and AJ as well. Continue these conversations.
I think the useful kind of extension of this is taking another sticker, and if you have an area of expertise that you can contribute from, just say, ask me about drones, ask me about whatever, East Africa, whatever.
We have lots of stickers.
And that way, during the coffee hour or whatever, people see that, it's like, oh, I have a question about drones.
Brilliant. Perfect. Very good. Thank you.